so I'm gonna set this.
Mr. Clerk, go ahead and call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy,
Here.
Alderman Moore, Alderman French, Alderman Vaquero,
Present.
Alderman Carter, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Ogilvy.
Here.
Chairman Conway.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This morning, we will start our annual process of reviewing the city's budget. A couple of things. I know that it'll be a tighter budget year just for a variety of reasons that Paul will go into. As you look at the schedule, if there's a department on there that or isn't on the schedule that you want called in, please let Joe Vaccaro know, and then he'll make arrangements to have them in. Also, during this period of time, we're open for business for all of the other board bills that are out there. Since it's the beginning of the session, we do have a lot of board bills that everybody's been anxious to get through. So we'll meet today, tomorrow, and then also Friday morning. I think we have a couple of board bills. I don't think any of them are particularly controversial, but we'll continue to allow anybody with a board bill that they want to have heard to bring it in, and if it's not controversial, generally we'll try to review those at the beginning of the meeting and move on to the full calendar agenda. This morning again, we have Mr. Paul Payne. Mr. Payne, go ahead and give us our overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'll be working off you should have a presentation in front of you. I'll be working off of that regarding the proposed budget. And on page 2 of that document, you'll see that the total proposed budget for 2017 totals $1,042,000,000. That's an increase of 2.4% over the previous fiscal year. And the illustration there illustrates the different fund categories. In the general fund, the total budget of $510.7 million. That's a 3.7% increase, which is a little skewed because next year we have a 27th pay. If you know what the 27th pay is, basically a function of a biweekly pay schedule, in that every 11 years we have 27 pay dates in a fiscal year. That's something that we prepare for. We always set aside amounts in 27 pays over the last 10 years, so it's not something that it hurts us from a budget standpoint, but it does skew the number a bit. It looks like it's a stronger growth, but it's actually, so if you take that out, that would be about a 1.6% increase. In the special revenue categories, that's $125.9 million. It's a slight decline from last year of 0.3%. We've had a small decline in the use tax, that's down about $1.8 million from last year. C&T funds up about $1.2 million. Some other special funds are down about $1 million. That's in the 1116 category. And public safety sales tax is up about $1.3 million. In the grants fund category, it's $56.8 million. It's a 3.4% decrease. Most of that is in the police grants area of about a decline of about $3.1 million. The debt service fund at $3.6 million is a decline of 25.2%. That is exclusively for payment of our general obligation bond debt. However, and that's our regular scheduled payments on existing general obligation fund debt. However, that number will be changing since we just had that successful election in April with the $25 million GO bond issue. So there will be adjustments to that figure, if not within this budget, in a separate appropriation. The capital improvement funds of $42.3 million, that's a 3.4% decrease. Last year, if you remember, we had a rather large performance, a strong performance in the sales tax, which produced some beginning fund balances that are not repeated in this current fiscal year. Enterprise funds are pretty much flat at $226 million. It's a 0.2% increase. Water division's down $1.1 million, while the airport's up $1.6 million. The internal service funds, that's the fund where other departments, it's basically an accounting classification where departments pay into that fund and they pay the insurance payments directly to the insurance companies and things like that. And the reason why that's up is last year we had, the police department didn't have all its medical payments running through the internal service fund, and that's being done this year. That's why that's a big increase. But it's not something that functionally is more funds. It's just more of an administrative type way of handling payments. And you can see from the pie chart below, the general fund represents just under 1/2 of the budget at 49.1%. On page 3, a little discussion of how we're doing the current fiscal year.
Excuse me for 1 second. Mr. Clerk, could you call the roll again?
Alderman Kennedy,
Here.
Alderman Moore, Alderman French,
Present.
Alderman Vaquero,
Present.
Alderman Carter, Alderman Murphy, Alderman Ogilvy. Here. And Chairman Conway.
Present.
Thank you.
There's 5 present, we have a quorum.
Going to page 3, this is just an illustration of how we're doing in the current fiscal year. Most of our major tax revenues are doing either at or slightly better than budget. For instance, the earnings tax is up 4.2% year to date, and that's both on the individual, which is up 4.2%, as well as business, 4.4%, which is exceeding budget somewhat. Payroll tax, and it's 3 to 5 year growth rate is about 2.1, 2.3%. So we're doing well on the earnings tax this year. Payroll tax, a little less than the earnings tax at 2.2%, still slightly above budget. But if you remember from last year, we had some strong performance in the payroll tax, so it's not surprising that it would pull back a little bit because the comparisons are a little difficult year over year. The sales tax as well was a strong performer in FY15, and if you recall, when we went into FY16, I was expecting a little bit of a pullback. The good news is that it being up by 0.6%, we didn't see a negative adjustment. So it's still up, but it's not growing more on that, but it is maintaining that base that we saw in the growth from last year. So it's slightly outperforming. Overall, however, we do have some shortfalls in both the franchise tax revenue category, where natural gas, usually when you have a mild winter, significantly mild, our natural gas receipts were down this year. Also, we're seeing declines in telecom tax receipts. We're off about $2 million, and I'm afraid that's probably just the change in the environment of how communications are being handled, because we've seen declines in telecom tax receipts over the last few years, and I think that's going to be a permanent phenomenon that we were seeing in the budget. So we're very close to our original budget estimates, some overperforming and some underperforming. On page 4 is sort of a snapshot of how the FY17 proposed budget looks, both increases and decreases. And the if basically you start with this year's general fund revenue base of 492.6. We're slightly outperforming right now through the third quarter of about $1 million. So if you add that to your base, and then you assume some growth at about 2%, which is typically what we see in a growth cycle, that would be about $9.8 million. Now the question would be, well, what about the Rams? We're losing the NFL receipts and such like that. Well, that is a hit. So you'll see that in your revenue primarily within the amusement tax receipts, which are almost down to nothing. Anytime you have maybe occasional soccer game or something, but other than that, we're not receiving amusement tax receipts in FY17, as well as a hit in sales tax. And so you're going to see that as well. So you got overall NFL receipts, we were expecting about 4.2, of which 3 million would be general fund. So you take that, and once you make your regular projection on revenues, and then a negative adjustment for those kind of receipts, and so I take a hit there. And the 27th pay, which is funded with the 27th pay reserve, that's about $10.1 million. Again, that's not a hit on the budget, but it's just something that we've planned for over the last 10 years so that it would be available when the 27th pay occurs, which is next year. So that provides you the base of the $510.7 million in revenue, or available revenues. And the general fund budget base, this year's budget was $492.6. And you can see down below what the increases have been, or will be. The police, including both salary increases, overtime increases, and 27th pay, and the other increases is about $7.2 million. Fire, salary increases, pension increases, and 27th pay. And I'm going to get in a little bit more detail beyond this page, of $6.6 million. And then you have non-uniform pay and benefit increases, including 27th pay, about $5.7 million. Some of our lease debt obligations, you have the asset preservation, the convention center. That's the amount we give the CVC for maintaining the convention center. That's up about $600,000. We have the first year's payment on the NGA debt relocation. You'll see that's in citywide accounts at about $1.5 million. And then there was a refinancing of the Carnahan Courthouse debt that actually saved money. That was about $1.6 million, so that was a reduction. So overall, it's a net increase of about $500,000. The Justice Center lease, that does not, it's actually flat, but our contribution from general fund went down because we've reallocated some capital revenue, and I'll discuss that a little bit further. Citywide accounts, you'll see a decrease in unemployment comp, which is trending down, and an increase in the assessor subsidy to cover some of the increased costs, particularly 27th pay next year. That's about $200,000. Workers' comp still continues to rise, and we've seen an increase of about $1 million in the current fiscal year. Parks, not much changing there. Judicial offices, you'll see a increase related to the public administrator's office, which will be the first time we've had that as a subsidy. Drug court is going to be fully funded in the general fund, which means there's not going to be a reallocation from the crime prevention monies. You'll see, and I'll talk about that a little bit further, that'll be fully funded at the $1 million. County offices, of course, next year we have an election year with 4 scheduled elections, and that's always, they run cyclically, so every other year you're going to see that bump in the budget. Streets, most of that, you're going to see a decrease in the refuse division, which is going to be during the year, mid-year, you're going to see a reduction related to the consolidation with the new garage development there, and the south garage is going to be moving those operations. Other public safety, you're going to see a reduction in I think mostly salary savings. Corrections, which has seen a decline in its census. This is other than the police and fire, public safety. Equipment services division, you've got an increase there related to that consolidation. The Metro contract is going to carry on the repair of the fire trucks is going to carry through November, and then it's going to be moved in-house, as well as the consolidation with the maintenance of refuse trucks in the new facility. Now, on the decline side, we have seen reduced fuel costs, and so those are being spread out. That's about $600,000 decline. So you can see with those increases and decreases, that adds up to about $510.7 million, and in a nutshell, that's where your budget is. Moving to page 5, this is sort of a highlight of some of our payroll costs. Of course, payroll costs are a big driver of our budget because they represent about 75% of our total budget. Of course, $10.1 million, that's for the 27th pay, and you can tell that's come from the 27th pay reserve, which we've planned for. $4.5 million is in the police department, and that covers the proposed FY17 pay matrix increase, including across-the-board increase of $2,000. At $3.4 million total, plus a $1.9 million increase in overtime costs. A police retirement increase of about $300,000, and then their share of the ERS increase of about $800,000. Uniform strength at 1292 is basically the same as last year. It's an increase of 5 related to some grant expiration, but it's pretty much the same as the current fiscal year. Fire department increase of $5.3 million includes the same pay proposal for the police department. The biggest increase there, and you'll see on fire, is an increase with pensions this year. There were 2 pieces of that. One is for the new plan, which had a recalculation based on the assignment of liabilities between the 2 plans of about $1.6 million, 1.7. And then the old plan, FRS, had an experience study, and they changed some of the assumptions. If you remember last year, we didn't contribute to that plan at all, but now there'll be a $2.7 million contribution next year. And in the non-uniform costs, we're seeing an increase of about $1.4 million. That includes allocating for the merit and pay increases from this year at $2 million. And then we had to actually decline in ERS costs this year, this coming year, about 1.8, related to another experience study. There were a number of changes, some good, some bad from a budget standpoint, in that some mortality assumptions changed to the benefit of the reduction to reduce our costs, but then we also changed the assumed rate of return and all, which increased the cost. So, but the net reduction was of $1.8 million. And as in previous years, we're asking departments to absorb their merit increases for FY17, which has not really been an issue with them, as we've done that for a number of years. Sorry, on page 6, or the page number's missing on this page. Again, this is just a highlight by department, some of the changes here. I'll go through them briefly. General government and finance, minimal changes overall. You'll see some salary savings we got in the Board of Aldermen's budget. City councilors got one position for collections. Comptroller's up 1.5 positions, though with lower salaries. They reduced some of their higher level people. And there's some vacant positions cut at Muni Garage and Microfilm. In the citywide accounts, again, that's where the convention center asset preservation increase is, about $700,000. The NGA debt service payment of about $1.5 million. Carnahan courthouse savings of $1.6 million. And then the offset with capital related to the Justice Center debt. And you can see some of those other adjustments with the assessor subsidy, unemployment comp, and trans interest. Parks and recreation, not really much going on there. Minimal changes aside from the fuel and workers' comp. We have included some lifeguard costs associated with keeping the Marquette Pool operating full year. That opened last year, as you recall. Judicial offices, as I mentioned, there is a subsidy for the public administrator for the first time. Beginning in January of 2017, the public administrator will no longer be an elected official. They will be appointed by the judges. And so one of the things that was included in the court's budget request was a subsidy for the public administrator. And that's something they have proposed over a number of years, but this is the first one that actually they proposed as part of as appointed a position. What this proposed budget does, and it's sort of working out a compromise with them, they had proposed putting the whole thing in general fund. Basically, they're a fee office, and they've been operating off of their fees, but their fees have been declining because they work on estates, and a lot of their clientele is mentally challenged or things like those kind of situations where there aren't sufficient fees to generate funds for the office. And so in looking at that, what this proposed budget does is sort of compromises. The general fund funds the public administrative position itself, plus a small subsidy to the office, but there's an 1116 fund, which will still receive funds from the office itself and say, look, you can run that office, but it's contingent upon revenues being available to run it. And so that was the compromise that it was proposed during this budget process. The judges seemed to buy into that, and so it's sort of a compromise in that.
How many, just quickly, how many positions do they have in there?
I believe it was one in the general fund, so that's where the general fund, but on the 1116 fund, I believe it was 4. Let's see. I've got it.
Oh, that's okay. Just
Okay.
you can keep going. I just we want to
I
come
believe
back.
it was about four positions in 1116. Now, that is contingent upon their revenues supplying that. So we've got a little subsidy in the general fund to help support them, but it's sort of a compromise in so that the general fund's not on the hook for the entire office. In the county office department, as I mentioned, the $800,000 increase there is for the election board and its costs of running the elections. Actually, it's a $900,000 increase for the election board and small reductions in other county offices. Street department down about $200,000. That's a net decrease, but Tony adds one position. I believe they were going to have people who they wanted some people to actually respond to phones in the office so they can have their tow people out on the street. So that actually was a good proposal from them. Street division salt increase is about $40,000. Refuse is down 4 vacant positions due to and we're going to reduce 5 more in 6 months due to the garage consolidation. Public safety, other than the police and fire and what we've talked about on the pay side, is basically break even there. Director's office includes some salary savings. The civilian oversight board, by the way, is a separate budget unit this year. If you remember, last year was part of 610. Well, now they've got their own number, so you can sort of track that separately. Corrections is up 1 position. Police supplies up a little bit there, and then there are proposed 5 additional park ranger positions within that police department, and you'll see that police park ranger section. Board of Public Service is up about $400,000 net, with facilities, utility accounts tracking under by about $100,000, but the other increases are related to that refuse and fire garage consolidation at $1 million, with a $700,000 reduction in the Metro contract. And then the other reductions, including police and fire, all fuel accounts are down about $1.5 million, and that's allocated across departments. All in total, that's a reduction of about $2.8 million. Moving to page 8, the special fund revenues, the public safety sales tax, that's up about $1.6 million. This reflects the higher sales tax base as well as the beginning fund balance because of this year's sales tax coming a little higher than estimated. The excess use tax, that's actually down $1.2 million. It's declined from the prior year ending balance that we had last year. Gaming fund, that is continued to decline. It's down about 6% this year. It's $100,000 down in this budget. It's stabilized the last few months a little bit, but from a budget standpoint, I'm holding them flat for next year. And the Public Safety Trust, that's the graduated business license tax increase that we did in 2006. That's up about $100,000 that we're appropriating. In the fund reallocations, half-cent capital sales tax, $1.4 million. If you remember, last year we had restored the ward accounts to its full allocation. This proposes an 85% allocation to the ward accounts, and that's simply because of the challenges we had on the revenue side, trying to bridge the gap. You're trying to minimize what we could in reallocating funds. If you remember in FY15, that was 75%. This would propose 85%, for $1.4 million. Recreation account, which had been also reallocated in FY15 and then was fully restored in FY16, remains at full allocation and proposed FY17. On the public safety half-cent account, if you remember, this is the crime prevention fund. That we had about $300,000 in the current fiscal year for the drug court. As I mentioned, that is now in the general fund. And if you look at your crime prevention account, that is fully funded at the $1 million level in this year. And so, I mean, it's sort of a trade-off in some of the things they do, but that you'll see that has been fully funded. And the local use tax, we are still doing those reallocations of the affordable housing funds of $500,000 and the building demolition funds of $2 million. On page 9, it's an illustration. This is an illustration of the general fund revenue outlook, starting with the earnings tax at $171.2 million. That's a 2.4% increase. As I mentioned earlier, it's currently outperforming this year's budget. The longer-term trends are between 2.3% and 2.5%, or 2.7%, 3 to 5 year growth rate, and I've got an estimate of 2.4% in the next fiscal year. The property tax, real and personal property tax, it's $59.2 million. It's a 1.5% increase. Real personal property tax is up 1.8%. Personal property tax is up just under 1% this year. This is 1.5% is in line with historical trends. Sales tax at $54.6 million. That's a 0.2% increase. Again, what that reflects is an underlying growth assumption of about 2%. But with the impact of the Rams and such, have knocked off some of those sales tax receipts, so that the growth would be, in that case, would make it nearly flat at 0.2%. The payroll tax at $39.6 million is a 2.4% increase. I've got that at about the same level as the earnings tax. And again, its 3 to 5 year growth rate is between 2.9 to 1.9%. Franchise utility tax is a 52.6%, as a 2.5% increase. The natural gas, which has a decline this year, I'm expecting a little bit more normal winter next year. And we had a 25% drop in heating degree days this year, and it's just a little warmer than usual. So I've got a little bit of a bump there. The telecom revenues were actually a transfer in because they go through the pension fund. I do not expect a recovery in that category of franchise taxes, so I expect them to remain at their new lower level. The intergovernmental fees, intergovernmental revenues at $26.3 million. That's a 2.5% decrease. We had received some benefit, some catch-up payments in the prisoner reimbursement categories. Do not expect that to be as high this year, this coming year, and so I've got a reduction there, and that's primarily why that category is declining. In the license fees, $13.9 million. That's a 9.3% decrease. Almost entirely that is due to the amusement tax, $1.6 million, which came in. We will not be receiving that next year because of the impact of the NFL. Departmental fees and fines, $49.6 million, that's a 2.1% increase. I've got slight increases there in both EMS, which is going through a new contract, as well as some building permit fees. In the other category, $43.7 million, that's a 33.6% increase. It's a little skewed because that other category includes transfers, which is the 27th pay reserve of $10.1 million. You take that out, and that's about a 1.4% increase. And under the pie chart illustration, you still see the earnings tax remains a third of our budget, the general fund budget, $510.7. On page 10, I've already highlighted a lot of these changes here, so I'll just go through them briefly. This just illustrates the budget by department. You can see some of the changes in general government finance. Non-departmental down 4.9%. That's where it's got all the changes with the debt service, in the GSA debt, the asset preservation, and the refinancing of this Carnahan debt. The big jump there in county offices, 13.2%, that's the Board of Elections. And then the public safety and the $287 million, that's 5.5% increase there. That's for the pay as well as the fire pensions that I talked about earlier. That's the biggest jump there. And again, that 3.7% increase for the general fund, that's actually 1.6% if you exclude the 27th pay. And from the pie chart illustrated, the public safety represents 56% of the general fund budget. Page 11, special fund categories, the local use tax. The local use tax is tracking down the second year in a row, down 2.1% year to date, and it's tracking at about $29.5 million. The FY17 budget, $30.9 million, has a fund balance in there, but it's still down $1.8 million from the previous fiscal year. And as I mentioned earlier, it continues reallocation of $500,000 affordable housing funds, which in their total budget of affordable housing is $4.7 million. And the building demo funds remain at a reduced allocation of $1.5 million. The entire health fund budget is there, excluding grants, at about $7.7 million. The lead and building demo funds funded through the building permit revenue and certificate of inspection fee. The lead fund has a significant positive balance. The building demo and board up funds, however, continue to receive $500,000 from the use tax demo fund, and their demo negative balance remains in the $1.82 million range. Gaming funds revenue are down nearly 6% for the FY16 third quarter. There's been some improvement in the last few months. FY17 budget $7.1 million is down $100,000, and it utilizes the fund balance in the gaming fund. So I do not expect that to be repeated in FY18. And the C&T fund, that's the fund from 1 cent restaurant taxes, which are up this year, and they retain the funding for the Sister Cities program at $75,000 and the Grand Center at $90,000. On page 12 is an illustration of the capital fund budget. At $42.3 million, it's a decrease of $1.5 million from the previous fiscal year. As I mentioned, the ward capital funds are allocated at 85% of their full allocation. Now, it meets the FY17 obligations on debt service, although if there was one area I would say we're more deficient anywhere in this budget, it would be on capital. And we're sort of struggling to come up with funds for, particularly in rolling stock, and it may impact our services because we do not have payments. We do not have a new rolling stock fee. Obviously, the $25 million GO bond issue that was just passed will help a little bit particularly with fire equipment. But our other rolling stock, particularly refuse trucks and service vehicles, we remain seriously deficient in that area. So that's the capital fund is something that. If someone said, hey, if you had extra money, where would you put it? I'd say definitely capital should be a major consideration here. In the pie chart there, illustrating the capital fund budget of $42.3 million. Existing debt service, $19.9 million. That includes everything from the City Justice Center to Juvenile Detention Center debt, the debt at 1520 Market, refuse garage debt now, which is going to be $1.4 million. And existing rolling stock debt of $3.9 million. We do have a few projects that are not just debt, that's other citywide capital of $1.9 million. That includes $100,000 for building repairs, about $1 million for juvenile improvements over at the juvenile division, $150,000 for a restroom over at the Carnahan Courthouse, which has been made inoperable in the last 6 months. And then in the first year of a multi-year installment to address some of the ash borer issues related in the forestry division, which I'm sure forestry will be able to talk about in detail. In the ward improvements, $8.4 million. That's a $1.2 million decline from last year. It does reallocate about $1.4 million from the half cent. But it does include about a $500,000 in beginning balances because the sales tax outperformed this year. Major neighborhood parks at $8.2 million. That's of which about $3.3 million is to service the debt on the existing parks debt agreements. Recreation center improvements, $600,000. That, as I mentioned, that's their full allocation for the year. And police department improvements of $1.9 million, and that's all allocated to our existing debt service. And the other slice there, the engineering administration, that's evenly divided between streets and BPS for managing capital improvement programs. Page 13 is a discussion of personnel trends in the proposed budget. There is not that much changing overall. General fund at 5,042 positions, that's down 8. You're going to see declines, for instance, with the sheriff's office was down 5 positions, city courts was down 4, refuse was down 5, circuit attorney's up 1, home human services is up 1, ESD is up 2. So you're going to see some scattered ones, but overall it's not a big change in personnel. In all funds, there was a total of 6,674 positions, and they were down, which is down about 7. And you can see by the bar chart there, public safety with 3,353 positions is by far the largest of those department categories. Slide 14, this is an update of the historical over the last 10 years or so. We are still down from FY07 to FY17, we are down from, in total funds, 7,107 to 6,674, but to a decline of 433 positions. In the general fund, that's a decline from 5,287 positions to 5,042 to 245. That's a decline of 245 positions. That just shows you that trend over the years. Page 15, starting with an update of the pensions. After 2 years of declines in the last fiscal year following both market improvements and the pension reforms, we will see an increase next year. Last year, in the current fiscal year, we had $79.6 million. We're going to see that will go up to $82.5 million, which is a 2.9% increase. And on mostly related to those two items that I talked about, if you turn to page 16, this gives a very detailed, a lot of numbers on this page, but it gives you a very detailed assessment of where we are with the pension systems. You can see we've got the employee retirement, fire retirement, police retirement, and there's the two systems under fire retirement. The employee retirement system on an actuarial basis is funded 80.6%. Basically, because we use a smoothing method, not all changes in the market are recognized all at once. It's smoothed over 5 years, so there's what we call the funded ratio on a market basis, which says if you were to identify everything today without the smoothing, what it would be, and that would be slightly less than 76.2%. Under the fire retirement system, FRS, if you recall last year they were 100% funded, but they went through an experience study in this past year which would change some of the assumptions. They reduced their assumed rate of return down to 7%, and so they made some other changes there. And so now on an actuarial basis, they're still close to being fully funded at 93.4%, but on a market basis, that's 87.7%. But the big change there is that it required a contribution this year. It was $2.7 million, so you can see that in the chart as well. And under the FRP, which is the new system, we were funded at 33.7%, which is not outlandish given that the fund's only 3 years old. And on a market basis, it's 31.4%. And on police retirement system, it's 79.9%, just under 80. On an actuarial basis, 76%. Once you drop below 80, that seems to be an indicator that your funding is just below where at minimum where you should be. And you can see from the total cost for the pension systems, $82.5 million. That consists of about $30 million, just under $30 million for employee retirement system, about $18.4 million for the fire retirement system, both of those combined, and $34.2 million for the police retirement system. Moving to page 7, just in summary, the total budget for FY17 is $1,041.1 million. That's a 2.4% increase. The general fund budget is $510.7 million. That's up 3.7%, or 1.6% after adjusting for 27th pay. It does bridge a budget gap, and the components include the 27th pay expenditures, the pay and pension and benefit cost increases, fixed debt and other increases, and $3.9 million in revenue reallocation. But it does restore funding in other areas. Total decrease of 8 general fund positions and a decrease of 7 in all funds. And while it's balanced, there are longer-term budget challenges. We will be, in this next fiscal year, entering the 8th year of economic expansion, which in historical terms is a long growth cycle. And something that I think one of the things that we should be concerned about is when that next recession hits, and are we prepared for that, and where we stand. And so attaining a structural balance is something that's important, and by structural balance I mean recurring revenues meet recurring expenditures. We're closer than we were before, although we've taken a hit this year, particularly with the loss of some revenue, particularly the Rams revenue. But it's something, but we're not there yet, and something that we need to focus on. And continuing to restore reserves. On a cash basis, we're about $14 million. That's just over half of our 5% target. That's something that the rating agencies are always pounding us on. You need to have sufficient reserves. And I can tell you that when we had the last recession, it was the reserves that sort of saved us when we had those 2 years where we had a decline in revenues. That was a pretty severe recession, and it was so that's an important thing, and I think that's something that we need to focus on in trying to build the reserves back up. Obviously, continuing pension reforms is something that we're going to have to also address in ahead, as well as financing of capital needs. As I mentioned, we did have that $25 million GO bond issue passed, which was great, although it's only a small portion of what of the needs that are out there. And that's all I have, and I'll entertain any questions.
What I would ask, just because actually the comptroller's out there waiting to come in, should have been at 9. If anybody has anything that they really need to ask, let's ask, but otherwise, I'd like to kind of ask Paul if you'd come back, which I know you will, and if you could send us all a PDF of this, including Carol.
Actually, this will be after this morning. This will be posted. This is posted online. Just go to the Budget Division website and it'll be posted up there.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions they really need to ask Scott? Please keep it short.
Sure. Quick question on rolling stock. Can we quantify exactly sort of how far behind we are in rolling stock investments? I know it's a big number.
Yeah. Chris Amos, our Equipment Services Division Director, always illustrates saying, hey, if you look how far behind you were, he would give a number totaling somewhere between $35 million, something like that. On an annual basis, you should probably be contributing, $5, $6, $7 million a year on that type of thing. I mean, there's in past years we've been struggling with that, where we would allocate for repairs and such, and we sort of band-aid things together to keep it going. But now the level of repairs that he's seeing is more than just the cosmetic type thing. He's seeing actual serious engine overhauls and things where it's getting to the point where there may be impacts on services, and so. But that is a major backlog, and it's a major concern.
Right. So on an annual basis, I mean, we're only funding like 25%, maybe 30, 40% of what we need to be allocating for
Right.
rolling stock?
In the capital budget, we got about $3.9 million for existing debt service. You could easily double that, and my guess is he would say that's probably not enough, but something in that magnitude.
Got it. Thank
Paul,
you.
can you send more of a detailed, when you get a chance, send it to the chair, and I'm sure he'll distribute it.
On the rolling stock?
Oh, no, just your guesstimate.
Well, you know what, I would suggest And because this is what I do, when I get that question, I'll ask Chris Amos to say, what is your, because what they do is they assign a priority to what the rolling stock list would be, based on age and use, and they give an inventory, and that's what he does, and I'm sure that could be provided.
Okay, thank you. And if we don't have any other questions, Paul, thanks for coming in, and if you could tell the comptroller to come in, I'd appreciate it. I thought he was fine. I think he's got all switched up, but you're fine. Yeah, well, we're about 10 minutes late. Let's see. You brought a whole group?
Half, y'all.
So, what I would ask is if you give us, because we're running late as it is, if you can give us a quick overview
Okay.
of what you have and need, and if you kind of keep it short and to the point, I
Okay, thank
appreciate
you,
it.
and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the honorable alder people, aldermen and women. Good morning, thank you for having us here. I will keep it extremely short. We have, a budget this year that has, less than 1% change from the previous year. Our previous budget, request was 9.8 million. The current budget request is 9.9 million, less than $100,000 difference. Our change in personnel is minimal. Actually, we have a decline in our TO. And as I wrap up, I'm going to introduce the team that came in. I have Dept Simmons, which is sitting next to me. I have Jim Garbaglia, Carrie Brown, Lisa Harmon, Kelly Anderson, Michael Hurton, Judy Armstrong, and Pam Bolden. They're all here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
So I will open it up for questions, because we do have a few minutes before our next one. It would be, I'll start with, I'll just go down the list. Alderman Kennedy, any questions?
Congratulations on making it so short. This is about $100,000 difference.
Yes, very, prudent in our office, very efficient, working hard, and I mean, we're just not playing. We understand we're honoring taxpayers' dollars, and we're making sure that we are an example of how you can be prudent and efficient in your department.
And you had a decline.
And a TO.
Okay, that's all I had, thanks.
Alderman French,
No questions.
Alderman Ogilvy.
I don't think I have any questions.
Hey, we're doing good. Alderman Howard, no questions. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you,
in.
appreciate it.
And we're back on time. Thank you guys for letting it go quick. So if the mayor's office is out there, yeah, if you can bring in whoever from the mayor's office. We're back on time, so we're doing good.
I'm gonna be it.
You are it.
Yeah, I am it.
Okay. I guess the mayor's got things going this morning, so he couldn't make it. So, Todd, if you want to run through, and now you do have a few extra minutes, and I'm sure we have questions.
Well, this is a very simple budget. Being the operations director, that's why I'm here. Very little change from last year. I think the whole emphasis on this budget is, we're once again looking to fund 16 positions compared to 15 years ago when Mayor Slay took over. Yeah, there was 25 positions in the mayor's office.
It's just gonna be Todd, it's just Todd.
So we are continuing the tradition that Mayor Slay started 15 years ago with 16 positions. I don't know if there's any questions. It pretty much stays status quo.
The budget's still the same as it was last year. We'll go down the list. And we'll, start with Alderman Kennedy. Any questions for the mayor's office?
It's the same.
Thanks, Todd.
I don't have it, thanks.
Oh, okay. Alderman French?
No questions yet.
Okay. Alderman Ogilvy?
Realizing that the budget is not changing very much, if it was going to change, Todd, what would you guys want or need?
In the mayor's office?
Yeah.
I think I've been there a little over a year now, and the mayor's got one hell of a team, a lot of smart people. So I'm very confident in what we have and what they've been able to accomplish, and I'm ready to move forward. You'll notice in here, there is a special line that was in here last year to hire a resiliency officer, and we're very near to doing that. That's a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. That's at 116 account. And we're very fortunate to get a 2-year grant to do that, and that resiliency looks at how we keep the city going, not just with an earthquake or a tornado, but how we handle the incidents of Ferguson or whatever can be thrown at us. So I mean, I think that's probably the most exciting thing happening here, and it's a unique opportunity. And I think that just adds to a great team.
Is that it?
Okay.
Alderman Howard.
I guess my question is, what does a resiliency person do?
Resiliency looks across all borders and boundaries and joins together all groups out, even outside the city, and they look at how vulnerable we are and how we can keep things going and sustain things when we take these hits.
Vulnerable in respect to?
To whatever can happen. I mentioned earthquakes, tornadoes. Well, now we look at what the terrorists can do. We look at civil unrest. We look at all those items, how they can have a negative or a positive impact on us. And we partner with everybody, because as we know, just the city can't do it by themselves anymore.
So
We need
this
the
would
help
be in coordination with public safety and,
across
Okay.
all lines.
okay. Thank you.
Todd,
That's all.
thanks, and at least mine, oh, wait a minute, coming back, I'm sorry.
I have a quick question. First, the elimination of the positions from 25 to 16, they're still there though. Is there a reason why you just still have them in there, even though they're not
Yep,
funded?
that adds flexibility, as you may have people come or go
Mhm.
during the year. It gives you the flexibility to zero one out. If you notice, they're not funded,
Mhm.
so in order to change and swap a position out, you would have to take the funds from an existing position and move it around, so you wouldn't have an increase in the budget. It just gives you the flexibility to change, to adapt. In case one of the aces would leave, you can bring in somebody else with a little different skill set
Mhm.
and fit them into a position.
Okay. And the elected officials' expenses accounts, I saw that was in there in 14 and 15, and then it looks like it was moved to the mayor's contingent fund. Is that the same amount? Is it the same money?
Same money, same way, just a different look in line with what the
And that-
comptroller asked us to do.
And that just goes to his salary?
That is an expense that the mayor can use, yes.
Lobbying has been pretty much the same. Do we still have the same lobbyists?
Yes, we do.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Todd, and again, send our thanks to the mayor for, all
Thank
these
you.
years, so we're in good shape. Thank you. Is Lewis here, or are you gonna represent Lewis's office? If they can get somebody over here, we'd be happy.
Maybe we're taking a quick break.
We can, if you want, well, I'll tell you what, we'll recess for 5 minutes while they're getting them, so we'll just take a 5-minute break.
Yep.
We're gonna go ahead and call it back to order. We have someone from the president's office here now. So the meeting's back in order. Tom, if you wanna go over the budget with us, and any
Sure.
changes to our budget?
Sure. First, good morning, committee. As you can see, this year's budget, not, as usual, not very different than the years before. Salary, there's a increase in salary that relates to the 27 pay periods we're going to have this year. Office and supplies has not changed substantially from last year, but it's enough in the budget to cover everything that we normally do, normally purchase with supplies and materials, including the Good Neighbor Guides. it did
You're fine.
decrease a little bit from our request. As you all know, there will be a small downturn in revenue this year due to the Rams no longer being here and a few other things that have caused a revenue shortfall. Office and computer, under rental and non-capital leases and capital assets, the two line items, office and computer, you'll see that they changed a little bit from last year, and that's due to the fact, just historically, for whatever reason, the way these line items were budgeted, money would always be transferred out of into 5335 from 5535 to cover expenses. And that's always been the case, apparently, in discussions with Lisa McNichols, our administrative assistant here at the board. I found that out this year. So for this year's budget, we just budgeted it appropriately, so we won't have to make the transfer that we made every year since then. Other than that, I mean, if you look on page 2 with the personnel positions, you'll see the bottom of that, the 27th pay salary adjustment that I noted earlier. We still have the positions in there for the legislative researcher and the financial analyst. We're in the process of reviewing some additional applications that we received. We reopened those two positions. We still have a short list from before, but we opened it up just to get a fresh batch of applications. Tim and I are gonna be taking an initial look at those applications this week, and we plan on that process moving forward fairly quickly to the Personnel Committee. There's also been discussion and meetings of a subcommittee of the Personnel Committee related to the what we call, I think now, the secretarial staff here at the board, and overall just support staff here at the Board of Aldermen. I've been working here for, I guess, 9 years, been here 5 days a week here at the board. And there's a couple things we need to think about for the future. First, when the Board of Aldermen is reduced, there's gonna be a significantly larger burden, I believe, on administrative staff here at the Board of Aldermen. And we are going to need to, start planning, at least as far as the job descriptions are concerned, and, the pay of those positions, making sure that we have people that, are coming in the door with a certain skill set and who are able to, continue to improve on their skill set, willing to, take training and classes and courses to continue to improve on their skill set. And so there's been discussion in that subcommittee of personnel to, alter the job descriptions of those positions, and also a small increase in the pay of those positions. And what I think that would do at the end of the day, if you have more skilled set of employees, or if you change their duties or rearrange their duties where they can have a better impact on the legislation that comes out of here, I think at the end of the day, the city and the taxpayers would see a return on that investment with either better legislation or better research legislation, so so that we make decisions that better affect the bottom line of the city. So that for now would be something that would still have to go through a discussion in the full Personnel Committee, and then also this Ways and Means Committee would have to agree to any adjustments in salaries. And with that, I'll take any softballs you have. No, any questions?
And I'm just gonna say, it's been a year and we need to get something done with that, but I'm just gonna go down the list. So, I'm talking about getting the secretaries the proper pay. But, I'm sorry, Alderman Kennedy, questions?
Thank you.
Mhm.
And did you speak to it at the beginning, the increases or something that the secretaries are supposed to be getting?
I spoke to it, that's what I was just talking about at the end.
Okay.
That there's a personnel subcommittee met,
Mhm.
and there's been this ongoing discussion related to not just salary, but, you know, duties, making sure we get the most out of our, you know, secretarial staff, administrative staff. You know how we're set up here at the board where aldermen pick their secretary.
Right.
There's always been that issue of, you know, one secretary may have a heavy load, another secretary may not have so heavy a load. But there's certain, you know, automatic duties that could be pooled amongst the secretaries, where someone who has a light load could do some things that help the performance or just the workday of those that may have a heavier load. And then also what training and what kind of skill set we can start developing in the people that we have, and also looking for in new employees, you know, down the road, wherever somebody leaves, whenever we replace someone. Taking into consideration that, you know, the board's gonna be smaller than it was, but, you know, you all know it's not just a legislative function, you're kind of a city constituent services function too, and, you know, considering the fact that
Well, then there's supposed to be something related to cost of living that didn't happen.
no, the cost of living, the across the board
Right.
raise, that happened, that occurred in January for everyone, except for me. I didn't take mine until my anniversary date in April, but everyone else just, instead of giving them a raise on our anniversary date, we just did it all in January, mid-year, to kind of spread it across. Except for me, I waited because I didn't want to be seen as taking my raise any earlier than I would have gotten it from what the other staff were
But
getting
that's
across
all
the
I was
city.
talking about. That's all.
Alderman Fringe?
Sure, I have a couple questions. So the legislative researcher and financial analyst, you reopened that and
And it's closed again.
it's closed again.
Mhm.
So we will be hiring for those positions.
Yes, and also, I don't know if this will end up being a budget consideration for us or for BPS. We now have the space open, that used to be CSB, that the, register was, in temporarily. We now have that space open again, available for us, for these two staff members and, whatever else is decided. I guess that would happen in the personnel committee. But in order to get that place, you know, I don't want to say functional, let's just say, it needs a little work done to it with the floors and some of the walls and that kind of thing. Even to just get it ready to go. We wouldn't do it like I'm not thinking we'll be doing a big reconfiguration of the space, but, you
Is
know,
that
there's a
in the
little work
budget?
that needs to be done.
Is that in the budget?
It's not in our budget, no.
Whose budget would it be in?
It's something that either we would have to add it to our budget or make sure when BPS comes in here that they're gonna have, some funds available for that through the facilities department in order to do it. If not, it would come from here. I mean, that would be the best place for it to be, you know, in my
Facility.
determination, yeah. I mean, they budget for repairs to buildings and to the buildings of the city government. I mean, so that room is a room in a building of city government. So, you know, but we've never done anything like that since I've been here, so I'm not sure that if there's a correct way that would be budgeted in our budget. But, I think before we pass the budget, we can make sure that the funds are available one way or another. Hopefully it wouldn't be too much.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. If the space is available, we better do something with it, or it's just gonna sit there for a year.
Yep.
The Good Neighbor Guide you mentioned, so is that for all 28 wards, or are we doing half?
We're gonna do, with the timing of things that are gonna be happening this fiscal year, the plan I would think would be to continue the way we've been doing it with the half, and this year would be the odd numbered wards. And I think maybe the year after that, we can look for something that may be a little, more functional, is if, I think everyone gets 5,000 now. So over a 4-year period, everyone ends up getting 5,000 in these 2-year blocks that we give. If, everyone got 1,250 per year, that may be a little more functional. 'Cause we've had some, there are concerns raised. When a new alderman comes in, they have to wait 3 years before good neighbor guys for their ward would get printed again. So they go 3 years without good neighbor guys. But if after this election cycle, if we go to printing, 1,250 for everybody for 4 years, which will still total 5,000, anyone coming in new or somebody has some changes they want to make to it, they'll be able to do that on an annual basis.
Okay.
And I've been assured that we have enough in the budget to cover
And that comes out of office and
the
computer?
new.
Where does that come out?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and you requested 65, but only got 50?
Correct. We would, doing our part as relates to the budget shortfall.
Okay. And I also saw that, the amount requested for salaries was about $20,000 higher for aldermen.
Oh, okay, so that
We-
is,
we-
well, the way he asked us, because of the 27 pay period, the way he asked us to request the salary
Mhm,
was for 27 pay periods up in the salary column.
mhm.
But then, if you see at the bottom, they added the 78,000 for
Mhm.
salary adjustments. They decided to just break that out in its own separate line. So the requested amount, the salaries are 78,000 higher than what's in the budget, the final budgeted amount for each, when you total up the differences in those salaries. So the way they originally asked for it was for 27 pay periods. What they ended up doing was just using 26 pay periods and then putting one single line item for the 27th pay period to cover all positions for that one pay period.
So this covers all pay increases?
Yeah, except for one, which I need to discuss with the budget director, which we need to get added back in per the, council of the Board of Aldermen, Tim O'Connell, his, offer letter. After 6 months of employment, his salary was to increase to at the level where Dave Sweeney was getting paid when he left. We started him off at a bit of a lower salary. I had that conversation on the phone with Paul Payne, but, he doesn't have it in the budget, as I see, so we have to, that's one thing, we have to add, which would be, I think,
Okay.
$4,000.
So that would be an amendment, we'd have to make it simple?
Yep.
Okay. All right, that's all I had.
We would have
See, no,
to,
Alderman, I'll interject yet, on that 27th pay, you're gonna see that in all the departments, and and the reason for that was because 27th pay sort of makes, it looks like salaries are higher when it's really not. It's just a function of the fact that there's 27th pay. So we thought that was clearer to put the 27th pay adjustment as at the bottom of the TO and just show what actual earnings on an annual basis would be.
And then what's that above it, the salary savings reduction?
That was a,
It's a figment of his imagination.
that was a reduction added to the salary base, and that was just a reduction to try to balance the budget.
Okay, all right.
and what we'll have to do in order to find that, from all we have to cut from somebody to put into this, so, everybody, and I think we've all been doing this for a while, but look for where you wanna make the cuts and where we need to make increases. Alderman Ogilvy?
Thanks. Tom, can you give me a brief history on why those positions were not hired that were in the budget last year? And then where it was roughly 95,000 that was allocated towards those positions. Where was that money transferred to since it wasn't
It,
expended?
it just goes into the citywide, fund. I don't know if it was used to, it just, you know, it just wasn't spent, so it didn't go anywhere, you know what I mean?
Well, it went somewhere.
Well,
No, it didn't necessarily go anywhere.
if you underspend your budget, then it just reverts the general fund.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, it's not like it's being taken out and put somewhere else.
We
It's
didn't
just-
have cash in an account or something that we had to transfer over because we didn't spend it.
So if you don't use it, you lose it.
Right.
Police and fire.
Well, okay, so part of that whole, situation was having a place for them to be. We had been in discussion, I mean, the register leaving out of that space is about 2 years, it was about 2 years coming. So that space was anticipated to be free so that we can hire someone and have somewhere to put it. Otherwise, we really didn't have anywhere to place somebody. So we kind of would have been, you know, we would have had somebody on salary and said we had somebody there, but they wouldn't really be able to function. You know, so between that and then when we hired legal counsel, there was a discussion that, you know, if we would have had legal counsel when we were hiring those two positions, legal counsel would have been, you know, involved, if not heavily involved, in some of the discussion of who gets hired and who doesn't. So when we got the legal counsel, there was also discussion, well, maybe we need to allow time for the legal counsel to get settled and have some kind of, you know, input on what the position is gonna be doing and, you know, what they think of the applications that will come in.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, those are two things. So for this budget year, you know, we'll have the space. Tim's been here for a while, and he's been involved in this, process that's going on right now in regards to filling those two
But
positions.
these people won't be able to start until the new budget year.
No, they'll be able to start as soon as we hire them, because we do still have it in the budget
Right, that's what I'm saying.
for this year. I mean, it's still in our budget. It's not, we wouldn't be overspending our budget to hire them now. You know, we also, you know, I think we contributed, what, maybe $150,000 to the budget this year from underspending so far, with Sweeney,
Yeah,
around for a while,
you
those
are
two positions.
tracking under budget currently. Yeah.
Okay.
make
So they
significant
don't have to wait to
contribution.
start until July or August if we can. hire
No,
them.
they can start as soon as we
Okay.
get them in here. They
Okay.
can start this, they can have an impact on this legislative session.
Great, thank you.
Paul, I actually have a question, and I'll come back. Can we use that money that's budgeted for them? Can we move that, since the money's already budgeted here? Can that be moved for, reallocated so we can use that money to fix the room up over there, since it's already in our budget for this year, and the new budget year starts in 6 weeks roughly?
Technically, you could,
idea.
the only, one of the issues that we're having, right now, and you're gonna see that from different departments, is that as you get closer to the fiscal year, you're sort of getting nervous about where the spending level is. I know police department has been overspending this budget, particularly on the overtime, same thing with fire. And the underspending in other departments has been offsetting some of that overspending in those departments to where the margin of error on that is very small. So usually, when I'll see a department that submits a transfer, and the transfers usually, and they're usually pretty good about submitting transfers within if it's a personnel services account, we haven't been signing those. But, I mean, obviously, that's,
It's in our budget, and we can do it if we want to.
but obviously, we want to end up the year with a positive fund balance.
Let me translate that, yes, we can do
The answer
that.
was yes. I'm sorry. Alderman Howard.
I was gonna ask that same question.
I'm
Have we
sorry.
gotten any estimates on how much it's gonna cost to prepare that registrar's office?
I'll get that from, Rick.
PPI.
So we haven't gotten that?
We haven't gotten it, no, because they just,
Have we
they just
requested it?
moved out. I think I did, I talked to Rick, we walked through it, Rick and I, who's over facilities. But I can, you know, clarify for him that,
I mean,
I tell you what, I didn't have this discussion saying, I know where we have the funds to do it, depending on how much it's gonna cost, so. And then there's also a discussion of, do we wanna do, some level of abatement of things that could be abated? Or do we want to,
well, Well, and
you
I
know,
guess the
do
other
a cover
question
job
is,
on some of that stuff.
how large is that space, and will it be just for one person?
It's large.
There's no, I think it can function for numerous purposes.
Okay.
We had,
Well, and I guess that's what we need to get on with, and the other issue is, what are we gonna do, when are we gonna work on the job descriptions? We've met several times with the secretary's situation, and start putting some teeth in that, and move forward on that, because we've got people here, and, you know, the time is running out. If we're truly gonna reduce the Board of Aldermen, we need to get going and start planning for that. And then you're talking about the Good Neighbor Guides. If we're reducing the board, why are we allocating all that money for that if we're, you know, by 2020, we're gonna have half as many aldermen? So, and then you
Yeah, I
can
think they'll
reduce
still
the
have a
number that are
full
printed.
term,
But you're
anyone that
gonna,
gets a,
I
comes in
mean,
office
reducing
next
the
year.
number seems kind of after the fact. If we're gonna have less aldermen, you're gonna have bigger
They'll
populations.
have bigger populations, so they'll
So
probably
it's
need
kind of-
twice as many.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really gain a lot of,
But I think we need to be proactive
doing
on
that.
that and in our spending, and has there been any movement, and I know this would take, you know, the Aldermanic, ordinance, I believe, as I recall, on the postage, you know, reallocating some of that postage money, and I don't know if I wanna open that can of worms
we
here,
do
but
that in
it's,
caucus.
it's
That's always
just,
in
yeah.
caucus.
yeah.
We talk about it, but we never do it, and I
Mhm.
don't know if it takes the leadership of the president to do that,
It's a decision of the board of
or
aldermen, the caucus.
of all of us.
It's-
Okay,
It's in caucus.
okay, then I'll leave that go. All right, so what are we doing about,
So personnel will be holding the meeting, the personnel committee will be holding a meeting soon to hear from the subcommittee, on what was discussed there. And, you know, so and there'll have to be a dual track.
and do we
In
have the
ways and
money
means
to raise the
personnel.
salaries? Do we
Yeah.
have you identified where that income?
We would have to identify that.
Well, now is the time,
Mhm.
I assume.
We can just
Okay.
increase that salary.
It's good questions, that
Okay.
now is the time. If there's no other questions, Tom, you're free to go, and we'll adjourn the meeting then.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. Just want to
Unless
reiterate,
there-
this is your
before-
budget, so.
Just in case, Paul, is there any questions for Paul or anybody before we adjourn this? Because we got, no? Then we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.